On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. This week's On Story, True Detective director Cary Fukunaga and Fargo creator Noah Hawley.
You know, it was very exciting, you know, to Vince Gilligan. I know if he could have 4 or 5 pages without dialogue, you know, where the camera is telling the story, that's cinema, and that's so much more exciting. I'm happy to write dialogue, but if I can figure out a way to tell you the story with a camera, that's the ultimate for me. And my responsibility as a writer, you know, in television, you know, it's to be a filmmaker.
In this episode, Cary Fukunaga and Noah Hawley discuss the rise of the Anthology series in television.
This anthology thing, I think it's just the zeitgeist right now. We weren't the first. American Horror Story was already doing it by the time we came around. But we did want to do something solid, you know, that felt like it came out of the cinema world. So what Nick, who's a novelist, did was basically write a long-form novel. And the idea was get a feature film world director, feature film world acting talent, package it, put it out there, see who wants to make it. And that's kind of what we did, and HBO was the 3rd or 4th meeting we had. We met with all sort of the major networks, and they were the most aggressive about it. And we were making the show within 6 months of that.
I had developed with FX before. I was in there talking to them about something else. They said, can you come talk to us about this? And they said, we'd like to do Fargo as a show. We're wondering if you can do it without Marge. By which they meant any characters from the movie, right? Because who else would come back? And then it was like, well, so what is it? If it's not the characters from the movie or the story of the movie, then basically they're saying, can you make us a Coen Brothers movie? Which, you know, no one had ever asked me before. So I just came in and I pitched them my take on it, which was sort of trying not to get the job in a way, because, you know, I said, look, it's not a series. Like, you can't turn it into picket fences. That's the wrong approach, and it has to be closed-ended, because at the end of the movie, you know, Marge goes to bed, and it's like she's 2 more months, and her husband got the 3-cent stamp, and you think, you know, tomorrow is going to be a normal day, and that's what makes the movie unique. And if tomorrow is another crazy Coen Brothers case, like, that's not gonna. It's not, you can't call it a true story anymore. So I just said, you know, it's got to be an anthology, and it's got to have a beginning, middle, and end. And if we do another one, it's got to be a separate story. And you know, FX had made American Horror Story. They understood that paradigm, and they were in.
The majority of 2-hour cinema is about plot, with good character in its best sense. But apart from, like, you know, like Enter the Void or other sort of explorations of visual poetry, the plot at some point is going to drive the story to an end, and it's complete within 2 hours, hopefully. What is the plot of The Sopranos? I don't think you could really put your finger on it. It's just really amazing character studies, and that's what makes it so genuinely engaging over time. Does Mad Men really have a plot? I would argue it doesn't. You know, they create some plots for you to latch onto, but it's the characters that you're involved with. Anthology, on the other hand, must have plot because it must have an ending. And that, in and of itself, is driving people who are driven to tell complete stories to move into television. And I think we're using Anthology as a way to trick television into telling cinema-like stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a sense of urgency that's required to pull people through. Obviously, crime, unfortunately, is, it creates a great genre to tell a story in, because someone does something wrong, and then will they get caught, and will they be punished? For me, plot is never enough to tell a story, and certainly in this world, the drive always had to be a character drive, and not in a schmaltzy way. I mean, the biggest rule, forget what lenses, or whatever, is like melodrama was not available to me. That is not a Coen brothers, and God bless them, because, the world is better off without melodrama, I think. So it had to be character that was really pulling us through. And, Malvo's journey, Billy Bob's journey, I mean, here was, the great thing about him was that he wasn't this mustache twirly arch villain. Like, he was his biggest drive was to see, can he push people, civilized people, how far can he push civilized people to act like animals? And that, on a minute-by-minute basis, could be, can I get this kid to piss in his boss's gas tank?
Why do you let her talk to you like that?
She's not that bad.
Son, she compared you to a clam.
Well, what should I do?
A guy insulted me once. I pissed in his gas tank. Car never drove straight again.
And that's just as important to him as, can I blackmail this guy for $1 million? And that made him a very dynamic character where you never really knew where he was going to go, because, we set this storyline in motion for him, and then events occurred that pushed him in another direction, and he dropped it without ever looking back.
Heroic motor in.
Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm looking out my window, and there's a young fellow urinating in the gas tank of a red Cavalier.
Martin Freeman's character, he's pushed to, to commit this crime, and then there's this question, is he going to get away with it? And that drives you, and you think that that's what you're watching for the first couple of hours, and then you realize, well, wait a minute, he's doing more than just getting away with it. Like, we're learning something. This guy, and I always, people love Malvo and they hate Lester, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic, and I think it's because, Billy's character, he's a scorpion when you meet him, so everything he does is not, I mean, sometimes you're surprised by how far he'll go, but, Lester was wearing human clothes when you meet him, so you're judging him by those standards. And so, yeah, I mean, every, plot is never, it's hard. I mean, that's the hard part of a dead body, starting with a dead body, right, is because there's this whole story that you're not showing, which is in some ways is the story that's really going to invest you the most in the case that these guys are so desperate to solve, is who is this person and how did they die, and it's a mystery that you can only solve at the end, right? So, for me to have every crime occur on screen and everyone involved to know them in advance, I mean, it makes it more character driven and less plot driven, I think.
What maybe made True Detective palatable to a wider audience is it had a mashup of two different priorities. Whereas I think Nick comes from a much more literary background. He would have been just as happy having Matthew and Woody talk to each other on a black stage and just talk for 8 hours. And me, I'm more of a school, as Noah was saying, that I would love a scene to work without words. And if I could tell a story without having to feed it to the audience, then that to me is a much more clever way of telling a story. So our sensibilities in that sense were different. Anywhere I could, I'd want to strip away the excess of that kind of talking and just open it up. Open up means could either be quiet, it can mean we're on a landscape and wide, it can mean that we have a couple of minutes that are just seeing this world that they're inhabiting, and that's not necessarily telling a story visually, it's just giving an audience a chance to breathe a little bit.
There was a scene I added, I guess, in episode 3, which was just, it's just Martin Freeman sitting at the table as he's sort of, living in that space with the blood still on the floor and everything. It puts you back into his mind in a more sympathetic way, and then you're moving forward with him.
He can afford it, your brother. Kitty said he just got a big promotion after only working there a year. Kitty said they also got one of those fancy new surround sound systems. Guess I married the wrong Nygaard.
I think it's just sort of repeating what you said about knowing where you're going means you could either construct the architecture of the space you're shooting to be, like you said, helpful later on, but also just the details, especially a story about a criminal or a mass murderer. In the sense of True Detective, all the clues that are dropped about Yellow King and Carcosa and the Black Stars, like we were able then to pepper this throughout the show. The lawnmower in episode 7 doing circles, like, and that's something I came up with when we were shooting that day. But because I knew everything we were doing in sequence, I felt confident I could make a bold choice like that.
And you start before the crime has been committed, so which is always more interesting. It's it's not a whodunit. You're meeting Bill Macy, or in my case Martin Freeman. Before you're explaining the events leading up to the crime. It's more interesting. And then one of the major things I said when I went in is we have to figure out what is our Mike Yanagita, right? Mike Yanagita being the character from the movie Fargo, who calls Marge out of the blue from her old high school days, and she has lunch with him, and he tells her this story about the girl from high school he married who got leukemia and died, and he's just so lonely.
Oh, and then I saw you on the TV, and I remembered, I always liked you.
Well, I always liked you,
I always
Mike.
liked you so much.
So, Mike, should we get together another time, you think?
No, I'm sorry. It's, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't. I thought we'd have a really terrific time.
It's okay, Mike.
You were such a super lady. And then I've been so lonely.
And you're like, why is this in the movie? Like, it has nothing to do with anything, right? My answer for why is that in the movie is because it's one of those things in a movie that says it's a true story where you're like, well, that has to be true. Otherwise, why would it be in the movie, right? So it's like, what are those elements that we're going to put into the show where you're like, why is that in the movie? And that was the fun of it as well.
So were you a Coen Brothers fan before this, enough to be able to break down the tone and style of their sort of general body of work?
I was. I mean, I've seen all the films, and I really love the breadth of the work that they do, and there was that moment where FX said, it's not a comedy, and I said, I think we need to sit down in a room, and I came in and I gave them a bar graph because I think that's funny of the tone comedy to drama in Coen Brothers movies, and there was like, Raising Arizona on one side, Miller's Crossing on the other side, and I was like, we're like right about here. So I was, and I think, obviously we had to sit down and figure out how to make a Coen. It's one thing to write the script and say this feels right, it's another to make the movie, and you can't call Joel and Ethan and say, hey, how do you guys make a movie? Because they're not interested in that. I think they would be horrified by that. And so it was like, studying the films and going, okay, well, so we came up with basically rules, and we didn't have a single director. We had 5 directors who all had to make the same movie. So, there were certain things that we came up with, we had a fist fight. I don't remember a fist fight in a Coen Brothers movie, but you have to think. You're like, well, what? So if we're going to have a car accident, how are we going to stage it? What should it look like? They don't do big accidents. Like, so we should, so that was always the process of, what would they do?
I think No Country for Old Men was actually a pretty good reference for us at one point, just because of it was a crime story where the detective aspect of it was the least important. They made these jumps, from the Cormac McCarthy novel. They retained in the feature version and didn't show, our main character like being killed. You'd think in a movie you would, and then they made that choice. It's the omission of certain things.
Yeah, so much goes back to No Country for Old Men, and the idea that the Coens on a certain level are really horror movie directors. There's that same don't go in the basement tension that they do so well, but. The one sequence I'm thinking of specifically is, Josh Brolin is sitting on a bed in a hotel room, and he dials down, dials down to the front desk, and you can hear the phone ringing, and nobody picks it up. And then, Shakur is in the hallway, and you're just sitting there, and there's no music, there's nothing, and you're straining, to hear anything, and you realize how big a character sound can be in your show. We always played around with that. I mean, there's a washing machine, in the first episode that became a musical instrument in our score and was used, that theme, that sound theme, was used whenever Lester was tense and the world was closing in on him.
At least take a look. Keep thinking maybe it's the settings. Kitty says Chaz fixes things around the house all the time. Says he put the toaster apart over the weekend. Now it's good as new. Rounds to beat the band.
There's a lot was made of your amazing tracking shot. In breaking that episode, was it about the shot, or did the shot idea come after the script?
The shot is not written in the script, but for the sake of communication to all departments, once it was decided it was going to be a oneer, even though it was still broken up into scene segments, so interior, exterior, right. People are gathering outside and starting to throw bricks. All departments knew that it was going to be a oneer and therefore had to plan accordingly. During a production meeting for that block of shooting, I pitched that still when we were in prep, even before pre-production, saying, this thing I think I want to do a oneer in. I think I also asked for 2 helicopters that day. I said either you give me 2 helicopters or I'm doing a oneer. So
the oneer's cheaper. We did a thing, where we had Billy walks into this building and there's a big shoot up and the camera basically pans along the outside of the building. We don't. It's all in the sound design. We don't see what's happening in there, but there's a whole sequence as he sort of makes his way up to the top floor, and that had to be a scripted. What was going on in that building? What was in each room? What were the footsteps like? Now he's in the stairs going up. Gunshots. Like, is there a gambling going on in one of the rooms? Like, what's all that sort of stuff had to be designed and recorded and put into it.
Come on, get him quick!
I think a lot of television over the years started to focus on other items, and craft was not at the forefront. And I think craft has been pushed, its progression in cinemas to the point where you can watch films now that are shot in the 90s that your mind were perfect, and you watch now and the camera's all shaky, and there's just elements to the craft that actually aren't as fine-tuned as they are now. So I think caring about craft is one element that's changing the face of television, literally.
You've been watching a conversation with Cary Fukunaga and Noah Hawley on Story. Next up, filmmaker Elaine Poon and her short film, Entrain.
Hi, my name is Elaine Poon. I am the co-director of Entrain, and my other co-director, who sadly couldn't be here, is Adrian Benson. We thought that it was a really interesting idea that every day we're riding on the subway or the bus, and we are essentially with different people, but we do not connect with them. We're all on our cell phones disconnecting. My parents come from another place and immigrated to Canada, and so do a lot of people who live in Toronto. And I thought it was a great story to tell because it talked of the immigrant experience of somebody who's displaced and not in their home country or their home place. Thank you for the interview, Austin Film Festival, and thank you for watching On Story.
Exactement. Des sciences, c'est de génie. Voilà, c'est mieux dit comme ça. Merci, Normand. Avec vous, on déshabille la pomme de terre ce soir.
Tout à fait. Petit commentaire sur le marché mondial maintenant de la pomme de terre pour continuer sur le domaine, Lionel, c'est que maintenant, il y a une économie basée. La pomme de terre est une matière première maintenant. Alors, je vais en parler dans quelques instants.
C'est ça. C'est considéré comme une commodité de l'agroalimentaire. Oui, tout à fait. Et c'est la 4e production mondiale de denrées.
Exactement. Mais la pomme de terre, scientifiquement, là, c'est une plante qui est de l'espèce, vous savez que j'aime ça parler des espèces de Solanum tuberosa.
African drum.
Yes. I know it.
You're not from here?
No.
You don't speak English?
A little.
What do you speak?
French.
Ah, you're French?
Well, I speak French, yes.
Moi, je parle aussi. Un petit peu.
C'est bien.
Vous jouez longtemps?
Non, pas longtemps, mais j'apprends.
Moi? I play since I was very little. Quoi écoute?
Genre du rock.
The next station, Wellesley. Wellesley Station.
I have to go.
Hey, thank you.
Pratique.
What do you listen?
For more On Story, check out our free podcast at onstory.tv or search the iTunes store and get the book today, On Story, Screenwriters and Their Craft, on Amazon.